Okay, so picture this. You've worked your whole life, right? Paying into both a pension and Social Security.
Oh, yeah.
You hit retirement. You're ready to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And bam,
Uh-oh.
you find out you're not getting your full Social Security benefits.
Nope.
Or, imagine this, your spouse, they worked in the private sector, their whole life passes away.
Mm-hmm.
You're entitled to survivor benefits based on their work, but those benefits get slashed because you had a public sector pension. Sound fair?
Well, that's a situation that's caused quite a bit of controversy, especially now with the Social Security Fairness Act.
Right.
It aims to repeal the two provisions that cause these benefit reductions, the windfall elimination provision, or WEP,
Okay.
and the government pension offset. We call that the GPO.
Got it.
It passed in the Senate, but its future is still up in the air.
So today, we're going to really try to unpack this act. We'll hear arguments from both sides, try to make sense of it all.
Absolutely.
Before we get started, though, if you're finding this discussion informative, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a lot.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so let's jump into the heart of this. We've got two personal stories here that really illustrate how these provisions impact real people.
Yeah. One story that really stuck with me was Jenny Smith. Part of her career was as a teacher, contributing to her pension.
Mm-hmm.
Then she switched to writing school books and paid into Social Security. Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, she contributed to both systems, so you'd think she'd be entitled to the full benefits of each.
That's where the WEP comes in. Because she gets a pension from teaching, she won't get her full Social Security benefits.
So even though she paid into both, she's losing out. What's the logic there?
Well, that's exactly what the people supporting the Social Security Fairness Act are saying.
Yeah.
They see it as a penalty. Like, she's being penalized for working in both public and private sectors.
Even though she paid into both.
Exactly. Even though she paid her dues. Twice in this case. So it begs the question, is it fair to penalize someone for public service, for having a pension? What do you think? Hit that like button if you're finding this interesting, and let us know in the comments.
Now, let's look at the GPO and the story of Greg Brown, a
Yeah.
police officer. What happened there?
This one shows just how much the government pension offset can hurt. Greg was a police officer his whole career, paid into his pension. His wife, Gina, she worked in the private sector, paid into Social Security.
Okay.
Sadly, Gina passed away. Greg was entitled to survivor benefits, from her Social Security contributions.
Yeah.
But the GPO really cut them down.
Wait, so even though his wife paid into Social Security her whole life, his benefits are reduced because HEA has a public sector pension.
You got it. The GPO says Social Security has to deduct 2/3 of Greg's pension from his survivor benefit.
Wow. So basically, he's being penalized for his public service pension, even though the survivor benefits are from his wife's separate contributions. Jenny and Greg's situations really show a flaw in the system. How can people be punished for working hard and contributing to both a pension and Social Security?
That's the big idea behind the Social Security Fairness Act, that these provisions are fundamentally unfair. They punish people who dedicated themselves to public service.
But before we get into the arguments for and against the act, we need to understand how these provisions work. Can you break down how the WEP and GPO actually function?
Sure. The windfall elimination provision, the WEP, it was meant to adjust Social Security benefits for people with pensions from jobs not covered by Social Security,
Okay.
like a lot of state and local government jobs. The idea was to prevent people getting a Social Security benefit that was too high, because the formula wasn't meant for them.
So in practice, how are the benefits actually calculated under the WEP?
It uses a different formula, which usually means a lower monthly payment than for someone who only worked in the private sector and paid Social Security their whole career.
Okay, so what about the government pension offset? How does that affect things?
The GPO specifically targets spousal or survivor benefits. So if someone's eligible for Social Security benefits from their own Albion work, but also gets a pension from a government job not covered by Social Security, their benefits get reduced.
Right, like we saw with Greg. His wife paid into Social Security, but his survivor benefits were cut because of his police pension.
Exactly. The GPO reduces the Social Security benefit by 2/3 of the government pension amount.
These examples really highlight the impact these provisions have. They make you think about fairness and equity in the system. Have you ever come across these provisions? Do you know anyone who's been affected by them? Tell us about it in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It's clear these stories really show how the WEP and GPO affect people's lives. Makes you question the fairness of the system for sure.
Definitely raises some concerns. But we also have to consider those who oppose the Social Security Fairness Act. They think these provisions, yeah, maybe they're not perfect, but they do serve a purpose.
Right, there's always two sides to the story. So let's hear the arguments against repealing the WEP and GPO.
Well, opponents say that these provisions, even if they have flaws, were put in place to deal with legitimate issues, like preventing overpayments, or what they see as an unfair advantage for people with pensions from jobs not covered by Social Security.
So they're worried about keeping things balanced, making sure the system doesn't favor one group over another.
Exactly. They believe that repealing the WEP and GPO without a well-thought-out replacement could create imbalance. It might even put those who relied solely on Social Security at a disadvantage.
It's important to think about how any change affects everyone involved, not just those directly impacted. But what about the financial side of things? There's been a lot of talk about the long-term stability of Social Security.
Oh, absolutely. The financial aspect is a big concern for those against the act. They say repealing these provisions would put a huge financial burden on Social Security, which, is already struggling with solvency issues. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimated that repealing WEP and GPO would cost almost $200 billion over the next 10 years. That's a big hit to Social Security's trust funds.
Wow, $200 billion. That is significant. Can you explain why Social Security's solvency is such a worry and what's causing these problems?
Sure. Basically, Social Security is facing a funding shortfall in the long run. If things don't change, it won't be able to cover all the promised benefits in the future. Several things are causing this. One is the aging population. The baby boomers are retiring, so more people are getting benefits and fewer are paying into the system.
Right. Plus, people are living longer these days, so they're collecting benefits for a longer period. And then there's wage stagnation. Wages aren't keeping up with inflation, which means less money going into Social Security through taxes.
Exactly. All these factors together create a very complex and worrying situation for Social Security's future. Even if the Social Security Fairness Act doesn't pass, these bigger challenges need to be addressed. We need to find a way to make sure the program can survive.
It's not just about this one act. It's about the bigger picture, the future of Social Security as a whole.
Absolutely. The debate around the Social Security Fairness Act is a good starting point for a much-needed discussion about the best way to balance the needs of individual beneficiaries and the overall health of the system.
Okay, so let's say the Social Security Fairness Act doesn't pass. What other options are there to address the solvency problem and reform the system?
Well, there are a lot of proposals out there, each with its pros and cons. A common one is raising the retirement age. Proponents say it reflects longer lifespans and would help the program financially. Opponents point out it could really hurt lower-income workers who can't afford to work longer.
What about raising the payroll tax rate or the earnings limit? Those seem like obvious ways to increase revenue for the program.
They are, but they also have downsides. Increasing the payroll tax would be tough on workers, especially those with lower incomes.
Right.
And raising the taxable earnings limit, the maximum amount of earnings taxed for Social Security, could bring in more money, but higher earners might see it as unfair because they'd pay a bigger chunk of their income.
Are there any other options besides these common ones?
Yeah.
Anything else worth considering?
There are some new ideas gaining traction. One is adjusting the benefit formula to give a higher benefit to lower-income workers. It could help reduce poverty among seniors.
Okay.
Another suggestion is investing some of the Social Security trust funds in the stock market. The goal is to get higher returns, but that comes with higher risk.
Sounds like a lot of different approaches, each with its own challenges. What are some key questions to focus on during these Social Security reform discussions?
Well, it's essential to carefully consider the impact any changes could have on different groups of beneficiaries, especially those who rely heavily on Social Security, like lower-income workers, women, and minorities. We have to make sure reforms don't worsen existing inequalities. Social Security is a crucial safety net for millions of Americans. We need to make sure any changes don't weaken that.
Absolutely. And we need to think long-term. A short-term solution might have unforeseen consequences down the line. Plus, any solution has to be financially responsible and help the program last.
For sure.
So there's a lot to think about when it comes to Social Security. But before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What parts of this discussion stood out to you? What are your opinions on these reform proposals? Tell us in the comments, and if you found this interesting, hit that like button to show your support. We've heard some powerful personal stories about the impact of WEP and GPO. We've dug into how these provisions work, and we've even stepped back to look at the broader challenges facing Social Security.
Yeah, and we've heard strong arguments from both sides. It shows how complicated this issue is. It's about values, fairness, and ensuring a safe future for everyone.
This has really highlighted how multifaceted this issue is. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've looked at the arguments for and against the Social Security Fairness Act, and we've explored different reform ideas. But what we haven't really talked about is compromise. Is there a middle ground, a way to address everyone's concerns and create a system that's fair and sustainable?
That's a really important question, one that deserves some serious thought. Could we maybe tweak the WEP and GPO to make them fairer while still dealing with those overpayment concerns? Or maybe we could come up with a whole new system that takes into account the situation of public servants without hurting Social Security's financial stability.
Finding that balance seems crucial. We need a system that doesn't punish people who dedicated their careers to public service, but also ensures Social Security will be there for everyone in the long run.
Absolutely. We need to be creative and willing to have a real conversation. We need to find common ground and solutions that work for all Americans. The future of Social Security depends on our ability to come together and find a path forward that's both fair and sustainable.
It's a challenge, for sure, but it's also an opportunity, a chance to build a better and more secure future for all Americans. As we close this discussion, I want to encourage everyone to stay informed, stay involved, and keep thinking about these important issues. If you found this conversation helpful, give us a like and consider subscribing for more insightful discussions. See you next time.